Hello and welcome to HamCorp's Guide to Ore Processing in GregTech New Horizons. This is a guide meant for employees who are looking to build a dedicated ore processing facility. This will boost company profits by a significant margin and is strongly recommended. Timestamps are available in the description to divide the video into chapters. The first chapter covers this introduction and my assumptions about your progression and GTNH knowledge. The second chapter covers a logical overview of ore processing. The third chapter covers all the required and optional machines, what voltage tier they're unlocked at, potential upgrades, and any other requirements. The fourth chapter will be a demonstration of how to actually set up an ore processing facility in-game. The fifth chapter will briefly cover specialized ore processing methods for specific ores. First, let me make a note of a few things. The current version of GTNH is 2.7.3, and it is possible that processing lines, recipes, or machines may change in future versions. This guide is targeted at employees at EV and beyond who have access to applied energistics, but the basic idea is generally applicable to any logistic system and any voltage. I will assume you already have knowledge of and access to applied energistics and knowledge of how GregTech electricity works, but some information will be given where relevant. I will also assume you have a supply of all the relevant ore processing materials, be it the ore itself or fluids like mercury or sodium persulfate. Finally, I will not be considering ore processing with milling simply to reduce the complexity of this video, nor will I consider ore multiplication using IC2 crops. If you do have these crops, they are almost always the best way to process their corresponding ores. You can think of the ore processing facility as a series of 4 processing layers. After each layer, the ore is processed a little bit, and some byproducts are obtained. These byproducts are not shown in the diagram, but are always dusts or gems. The topmost path in this diagram is the most default ore processing route, which is available to nearly every ore in the game. Layer 0, named this way because the multi-block miner does this step for you, is simply to macerate the ore blocks or raw ores into crushed ores. Layer 1, already, the processing lines start to branch. One path is purification via an ore washer or chemical baths, and the other is a second maceration. This will give you either purified ore if you take the purification path, or impure dust if you macerate a second time. Note that not all options are available to all ores. Different ores can and should take different paths depending on the ore and depending on your needs. How this is done in practice will be covered later in the video. Layer 2. Again, there are many possible options for the purified ore, but only one option for the impure dust. The purified ore can be macerated, thermal centrifuged, or sifted. The impure dust can only be centrifuged. Maceration or thermal centrifugation necessitates further processing, while the other two options give you your final processed dusts. Layer 3. This layer is pretty straightforward. The purified dusts are centrifuged, and the thermally centrifuged ore is macerated. This gives you your final processed dusts. At this point, there are a few things to mention. First, some ores have their own special processing methods that don't fall under these categories. With the exception of oil sands, you can of course choose to process these ores regularly, but the alternative special processing methods yield higher or rarer outputs, such as samarium from monazite or indium from galena and sphalerite. Second, there is also the electromagnetic separator, which is another processing option for purified dusts in layer 3, but I have never found it to be more useful than just centrifuging, so I will not be covering it. Third, you will also get impure dusts and crushed ores from small ores, regardless of whether you're using a single block miner or a multi-block miner. This is something to consider when setting up the import of your ore into your ore processor, but my setup will automatically handle that. For now, here's another flowchart that explicitly shows byproducts and ores with special processing needs. Feel free to pause the video and take a screenshot, or join the HamCorp Discord where I'm happy to provide all of my flowcharts. But you're a good employee, so you've already joined, right? To bring this process to life, we're going to need some machinery. If you don't have access to any of these machines for any reason, you can use the single block version, but your throughput will be much slower. You're going to need an industrial maceration stack. This is the multi-block macerator, unlocked at EV. You can also upgrade this with a maceration upgrade chip, which requires a ZPM circuit and IV macerators, effectively gating the upgrade behind IV machines. You will also need platinum and palladium to craft the maceration stack casings for the upgraded version. The upgraded stack has 4 times the parallelization capacity as that of the regular stack. The ore washing plant. This is both the multi-block ore washer and the multi-block chemical bath, unlocked at EV, the large thermal refinery. This is the multi-block thermal centrifuge and is also unlocked at EV. the large sifter control block. This is the multi-block sifter, and this is actually unlocked at HV, the industrial centrifuge. This is the multi-block centrifuge unlocked at EV, the industrial electrolyzer. This is the multi-block electrolyzer unlocked at IV. This does not directly play a part in ore processing, but I mention it here because a lot of the so-called final product dusts have no use except to be electrolyzed into more usable dusts. Finally, the integrated ore factory. This is an all-in-one ore processor and is unlocked at UHV. I will not be covering this machine in this video because if you do have access to this machine, you know more about ore processing than I do. Those are the machines required, but there are some other components that are also required. The ore dictionary card. To set up the ore processor completely, you will need ore dictionary cards, which requires an IV conveyor and IV machine hull, along with a small amount of platinum. You can get by without this, but you'll have to manually input ore into the starting point of your processor, and some of the machines may be more difficult to filter. The ME output bus and acceleration cards. The ME output bus is less laggy than the output bus plus ME interface combo, and so they're recommended, and a lack of acceleration cards will make filling chemical baths very slow. You will need a bit of platinum to make these. If you're in UV or beyond, you can also use the stocking input hatch. Ender chests. Ender chests are a great way to transport ore from your miners across the galaxy directly into your ore processor. They will make your life easier, but are not strictly necessary. The Ender chest is gated behind IV, Radon, Netherstars, Iridium, and a Thaumcraft wand with a capacity of at least 100 after discounts. It is expensive, but worth it. Other AE2 components such as ME controllers, cables, interfaces, and so on are required, and I will assume you have access to them. Here I am in a personal dimension in creative mode. This is my test world, and this is where I'm going to set up the ore processing facility. Some things here to avoid confusion. Any applied energistics networks that are shown here are just going to be powered with a neutronium energy cell. This is infinite energy and is just so I don't have to think about this for the demonstration. I will also be powering all multi-blocks using a debug power generator. This is the GregTech version of infinite power. I will be running all machines at LUV, but you can run it at whatever voltage you want. Also, I'll be using auto-taping maintenance hatches so I don't have to deal with maintenance issues during the demonstration. And finally, anytime you see a red cable, this is my main network. This has all of the random garbage that you have in our GregTech playthrough. And anytime you see a blue covered cable, that is the ore processing subnet. So let's start with that. I said subnet. I assume you're familiar with the concept of a subnet from applied energistics. If you're not, there are plenty of videos that do a good job of explaining what a subnet is, but it's basically a separate network that only has access to a subset of your main network's items and machines. We will be using a subnet for ore processing, and the way we're going to do this is we're going to have our main network here, and I'm going to put a storage bus here, and that is going to connect to an interface on the subnet. So now, anytime I put anything into my main network, it may try to put things into my subnetwork, which I don't want. What I'm going to do on the storage bus is, first of all, I'm going to set it to insert only, just to be explicit about it. I'm going to place an ore dictionary filter card here. This makes a new button on the left, and if you click it, you get a text prompt here. This is your ore dictionary filter. What an ore dictionary filter card does is it defines a filter, and the filter is a regular expression, and it's applied to the ore dictionary name of all items. So for example, if I were to use a filter of ore star, what that does is anytime I try to put an ore block into my ME network, you can see here the ores in GTNH are all ore dictionary to ore and then something. Pretty much always the name of the ore. But all ores will start with lowercase ore and then have something afterwards. So this filter will catch all of the ores. But in GTNH 2.7, we also have raw ores. These are a little different. So we want to catch all ores. The pipe symbol is a logical OR, raw ore star. Now, this will capture all ores and all raw ores. One important note, though, ore berries also follow this logic. Just for you to get familiar with ore dictionary expressions or regular expressions, I will leave it to you to figure out a way to exclude ore berries. And now the storage bus is filtered according to that regular expression. I'm also going to put a sticky card in here. Anything that can go in the storage bus can only go in the storage bus. For example, if I spawn a bunch of ores here, these raw ores, these should go into this storage. Of course, there is no storage here, so let me put down like a chest or something. Now, if I put raw ores into my main network, it should end up in this chest, which is attached to the subnetwork. And indeed it does. On top of that, if this chest is full for whatever reason, and I try to put in more raw ores into the main network, it doesn't go in because there is nowhere for it to go because of the sticky card. So this way, all ores and all raw ores are sent into the subnet. It is important to note that the storage bus does not push items. So any ores you already have in your system are not going to be sent into the subnet. To get around this, you can just take the ore out of your system and put it back in. That will put it into the subnet. Or you can replace the storage bus with an export bus, and you can forego the sticky card. What I like to do is, first of all, I just manually deal with the ores that happen to be in my network when I'm setting up the ore processing. And like I said, the export bus will make that a bit easier for you. But what I like to do is I like to place an ender chest somewhere in my ore processing facility, and you can color code it however you want. But the point of the ender chest is that it is the place where all of my multi-block miners send their ores. So when I have a multi-block miner set up, I typically have my output bus pointing into an ender chest, and then that same ender chest goes straight into my ore processing subnet. The ender chest, of course, does not push items either. And so far, I have been using an import bus with acceleration cards to pull from the ender chest. I don't really like to use import and export buses unless I really need to. So you can get around this by using other methods, such as item conduits or conveyors into an interface or something, anything. But for this demonstration, I will be using this import bus. So any ores that are put into this chest will be pulled straight into the network. And because of the storage bus with the sticky card, any ores that go into the main network will be stored in the subnetwork. And they're not allowed to be stored anywhere else. That's the basic setup of how I get my ores into ore processing. Now to actually set up the processing, let's go back to the layers for my schematic. Layer 0 is maceration. All raw ores get macerated without exception. Well, with one exception, oil sands. Oil sands needs to be centrifuged. So to deal with oil sands, let's set up a multi-block centrifuge here. Now this industrial centrifuge is purely for processing oil sands. You can of course use one centrifuge for multiple parts of your ore processing facility. But just to keep it simple, I'm just going to make a new machine every time I need it. Now I'm going to place a storage bus on the input bus of the centrifuge. I'm going to place a sticky card in here, and I'm going to place my oil sands ore and also raw oil sands ore, and set it to insert only just to be explicit. So now anytime oil sands or raw oil sands enters the subnet, it can only be stored here. And of course I do need to connect it to the rest of the system, but that's kind of obvious. I personally like to send the outputs straight back into the mainnet, but this is a personal choice. If you want, you can send it into your subnet and deal with it there. But eventually it's going to have to make it back into your mainnet. So I just like doing this. But now, what to do with all of the other ores? They need to go into this macerator. Because every other ore has to go in here, I'm going to place a storage bus here, and I'm going to connect this up. And at this point, anytime I put anything into the system, it's going to go into this maceration stack, unless it's oil sands, in which case it'll go to the centrifuge. That's not exactly what we want. We don't want everything to go into the maceration stack. We only want ores and raw ores to go in here. The ore dictionary filter card will save us yet again. And here we're going to use the same regular expression. So ore star, ore, raw ore star. However, this isn't exactly going to work because this includes oil sands ores. So we want to do and not star oil sands. I think this has to be capital O. So now oil sands is not allowed to go in here, but all other raw ores and ores are. Now I have here some raw oil sands ore and some raw silver ore, so we can test this. By putting these ores into the ender chest, I'm simulating a miner in another dimension mining up ore for you. Immediately this starts spinning, which is good. That means the oil sands was sent in here. And over here, we've got all of the silver. I think the machine's off. Yeah. I am also going to place a sticky card in here, just to make sure that raw ores and ores never ever go anywhere else. But to be honest, I don't think they will, so this is kind of a little redundant. That's layer 0. Simple enough. Now it starts to split. There are multiple paths you can take. So 2 of the paths will give you purified ore, that's washing and chemical bathing, and the other path will give you impure dust. Now here I am with layer 1, which is the second layer. Sorry about that. Here I have 3 ore washing plants and a maceration stack. Don't worry about these are the next layer. I will come back to those. 2 of these ore washing plants are set to chemical bath mode. You can change the mode by clicking this button here. And the third one is set to ore washer. For the 2 chemical baths, I have a little setup here just to supply myself with infinite sodium persulfate and infinite mercury. So just ignore the drawer, the quantum tank, and the trash can. Those are not part of the ore processing setup. In your setup, you'll have to provide these fluids by yourself with a fluid export bus or whatever means. From the last step, we have crushed ores. We also have dusts or gems as a byproduct. We don't want the dust or gems to go into any of these machines. Those simply need to go straight back to the mainnet. However, that will be a final step. All of these machines are going to make dust or extra gems, and we're going to handle them all at the same time. So forget about them for now, we'll come back to those. The crushed ore can go into 4 different machines, right? And each ore may have a different ideal processing path. For example, lignite is kind of useless, and I don't want it to spend too much time in my machines clogging everything up. So what I like to do with lignite is I just crush it again, and I centrifuge it, and it's gone. So lignite is one of the ores that goes into the maceration stack. So I set the filter to lignite, and I have a sticky card here. So crushed lignite coal ore cannot go anywhere except into this macerator. As for these 2 chemical baths, crushed antimony, for example, does not have a mercury option. You can send it into the ore washing plant if you want, but typically it's better to send it into the chemical bath because you get, for example, a 70% chance of zinc here and only an 11.11% chance if you wash it. So same thing, you set the ore in the storage bus with the sticky card. If you need more space for more ores, you can use capacity cards to expand this. A mercury example would be silver. Silver can be processed with mercury for a 99% chance of an extra silver dust. Or let's say you have infinite silver and silver is not at all a concern for you, or more realistically, you're not able to make mercury fast enough to keep up with your demand. You could instead send it to an ore washing plant, and that gets you lead dust. There really is no optimal way to process this, even though it kind of seems like this one is the best. The way you set up your different ores is completely dependent on your needs. If you have infinite lead, it makes no sense to wash the ore. If you have infinite silver, it kind of makes no sense to chemical bath the ore. For that reason, I'm not going to go through every single ore because it doesn't really make sense to do that. Your needs can also change over time, so that's something you're going to have to figure out yourself for each ore. And finally, for the ore washer, we're going to do the same thing. Sticky card, anything that you want to wash goes in here. Vanadium magnetite, for example. There is no chem bath recipe, so this is the only place it can go. There are a few ores that you do not want to send into any of these machines. Those being crushed ilmenite, crushed monazite, and crushed bastnasite. These have their own uses, and what I'm doing here with the sticky card is I'm sending it to this storage bus, which is connected to an interface on a yellow network. This is a different subnet. This is going to be a special ore processing subnet. It could also just be a chest if you want. It doesn't matter. The point is that we're not going to process those 3 things with the regular ore processor because you can get much better yields by doing a unique processing line for each of those. I'll cover that in the next chapter. Storage buses filtered with sticky cards is the key to this whole thing. So I'm going to set up this next section and then we'll talk about this. Layer 2, more of the same. Again, we're going to use storage buses and sticky cards with filters to send things where they're supposed to go. These 3 machines, the macerator, thermorefinery, and sifter, all process purified ores, and it really is up to you where you want to send these ores. So I will of course be sending diamonds into the sifter. I like to send things like purified meteoric iron ore into the thermorefinery, because this has a chance of iridium metal residue dust if you first thermal centrifuge it and then macerate it. This is an interesting ore also because it has both choices of chemical bath. Personally, I would say the mercury one is the better one for the platinum metallic powder dust, But again, it depends on your needs. And finally, the macerator is kind of for everything else. Purified vanadium magnetite, for example. As for the centrifuge, this is not for purified ore. This is for impure dust. Every single impure dust must go in here, except for 3. Impure ruby dust, impure sapphire dust, and impure green sapphire dust. These have their own unique processing method. Not only that, for ruby, you should probably be washing it and then sifting it. So you will rarely ever even see impure piles of these dusts. But you will see them for mining small ores. Small ores are going to eventually end up in your ender chest or whatever source you have from your miners. And when they're pulled into the system, they still do need to be processed. So we're going to process them here. Besides those 3, all other impure dusts have to go into the centrifuge. That's a lot of dusts, so it makes sense to use an ore dictionary filter card. The filter we want is dust impure star and not star ruby and not star sapphire. This also catches the green sapphire. So this is telling the storage bus that all impure dusts have to go here except for ruby and sapphire and green sapphire. Now there is one more layer to finish our ore processing, and then we'll deal with the actual output dusts. This includes the byproduct so far. Also, before continuing on, there are actually some more things that need to be processed in the special ore processing subnet. Purified bauxite ore, purified sphalerite ore, and purified galena ore. Each of these has its own processing method. So these 6 things are not processed by this layer. Now the final layer is fairly straightforward. It's just a centrifuge and a macerator. All things that still remain need to go in here, pretty much, with one exception. Purified ruby dust, purified sapphire dust, and purified green sapphire dust. Those are the same ones that we have here, and those are also going to be processed on a special subnet. That is, of course, just a suggestion. All of these are suggestions. You don't have to do any of this, but I strongly recommend doing all of them. The ruby and the sapphires you can skip. They're not that big of a deal, but the other ones are quite important that you do on a different net. Now, purified dust goes into the centrifuge. And of course, we're going to do the same thing yet again, ore dictionary with the sticky card. And the filter this time, you can just copy the impure dust filter and just change it from impure to pure. Now, all pure dusts are going to get centrifuged here, except for ruby and sapphire. And into this macerator is where the thermally centrifuged ore goes. This is going to be an ore dictionary card with the sticky card yet again. And the ore dict is crushed centrifuged star, like so. And I don't believe there are any crushed centrifuged ores that need to go into any other machine. So this should be everything. Now we just connect it all up. Right now, all of our dusts are just going to sit in these internal buffers of each of these output buses. And obviously we don't want that. All we need is a storage bus set to insert only, just to be explicit, with an ore dictionary filter card. And we need to set the filter to dust star and not pure and not impure. Of course, I haven't talked about these special ore processing things. I think part of the fun of GTNH is figuring out processing lines yourself. But if you really want me to do it for you, just let me know in the comments and I will make a follow-up video where I further process these things. Maybe not the monazite and bastnasite, because that's a whole processing line, but the other ones I will show. You can, of course, use the same multi-block for multiple functions, multiple layers. I like to separate them out because it's easier to see when you're going from one layer to the next. But you could, in theory, use the same multi-block and just have different input hatches around. And now we're done. This is how to set up ore processing in GTNH. Earlier, I mentioned a list of ores that have their own specialized processing methods, and in the demonstration, I sent them off to a subnet to process them later. In this section, I will just briefly mention the different processing methods for these various ores. Crushed ilmenite can be sent to a chemical bath with sulfuric acid for 2 rutile dust, a 60% chance of ilmenite slag dust, and 2,000 liters of green vitriol water solution. Note that you can do this with purified ilmenite ore, but you only get a 30% chance at ilmenite slag dust. This results in washing the ilmenite first to actually be worse than directly sending it into the sulfuric acid chemical bath. The slag dust can be further centrifuged into iron, niobium, tantalum, manganese, and magnesium. The green vitriol water solution can be electrolyzed for iron, oxygen, and a full refund of the sulfuric acid. Purified bauxite ore can be mixed with water, quicklime, and sodium hydroxide to make bauxite slurry. This can be further processed in the bauxite line to make alumina, sodium carbonate, calcite, rutile, gallium, quicklime, silicon dioxide, iron, copper, tin, nickel, antimony, and water. You can also do this with crushed bauxite ore, but it's better to use purified ore so you can squeeze the most out of your inputs. Crushed monazite and crushed bastnasite ores are the starting point of the monazite line, which is a long processing line that culminates in the production of samarium. Ruby, sapphire, and green sapphire. Impure dust from mining and purified dust from ore processing should be sent to a mixer with a tiny pile of sodium hydroxide and 1,000 liters of hydrochloric acid. This will craft the corresponding juice, which can be centrifuged for various dusts and a refund of the hydrochloric acid. Sphalerite and galena can be reacted in a 1:3 ratio along with 4,000 liters of sulfuric acid to make 8,000 liters of indium concentrate. This can be reacted with 4 aluminium for a tiny pile of indium and 8,000 lead-zinc solution. This solution can be electrolyzed for lead, silver, zinc, sulfur, and water. The 8 platinum concentrate ores, sheldonite, roxite, tetrahedrite, bornite, pentlandite, wittichinite, chalcopyrite, and duralite. You can of course process these ores as usual to get a wide variety of dusts, but if you're struggling for platinum, you can also use them in place of or in conjunction with platinum metallic powder dust as the starting point of the plat line. Thank you for watching the HamCorp Guide to Ore Processing. After implementing the ore processing facility in your own base, HamCorp expects a lenient 85% cut of the profits. If you have any more tips for ore processing, please leave a comment. Any significant omissions or mistakes from the video will be addressed in a pinned comment by myself. If there is no pinned comment, this video is flawless. Just like you. See you next time.